Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're doing something a little different. We are going to toss aside the sweeping maps and the glorious battlefield monuments, and we're getting right down into the grim, visceral reality of 1863 during the American Civil War. We're going to explore what life was actually like for the people on the ground. And the human cost? It was absolutely staggering, extending far beyond the battlefield itself. Let's just dive right in. By 1863, all that romanticism from the war's early days, the bright uniforms and the parade ground marches, that had completely vanished into mud and misery. The reality of just surviving day to day had become deeply intimate and honestly terrifying. Section 1. The reality of total war, a grim weariness. So we're moving way past the initial excitement of forward to Richmond and entering a bitter strategic winter stalemate. To really grasp this, we've got to understand the era of total war. These armies weren't just fighting each other anymore, they were fighting the elements. Your average soldier was hunkered down in a literal quagmire of mud and bitter cold. They weren't charging heroically, they were just surviving day to day in freezing camps, dreading the inevitable spring thaw. Because, spring meant the resumption of mass slaughter. The entire nation, on both sides, was just settling into this incredibly grim weariness. Section 2. The invisible killers, disease and medicine. Now, shifting our focus from the sprawling battlefields to the microscopic enemies soldiers faced every single day. Think about this. While generals were sweating over artillery and flanking maneuvers, the reality on the ground was that rampant poor sanitation was decimating the ranks way faster than any cannon fire. Imagine a massive camp of thousands of men, and the latrines are positioned upstream from the exact river they're using for drinking water. That contaminated water led to horrific, massive outbreaks of dysentery, cholera, and diphtheria. These invisible killers, they were the true harvesters of men in 1863. And man, if you actually happened to survive the disease but caught a bullet in combat, you faced a whole new nightmare. Soldiers vividly described 19th century field hospitals as a speedy road to the grave. This was an era before anyone really understood germ theory, so surgeons practiced what was called heroic medicine, which often meant rapid amputations with super primitive anesthesia, or sometimes none at all, inside incredibly unsanitary tents. The treatment could literally be just as terrifying as the injury itself. Section 3. Rations and Logistics, a tale of two stomachs. Let's pan out to the macro level for a second. Massive logistics and sheer industrial power basically dictated daily survival, and the industrial divide between the two sides was night and day. On the Union side, sure, Northern soldiers complained endlessly about their boring diet of salt pork and hardtack crackers, but their bellies were mostly full. The Union had masterfully transitioned to this highly efficient all-mule system that kept supply wagons rolling. But on the Confederate side, Robert E. Lee's army was dealing with starvation rations. They critically lacked fresh vegetables, working wagons, and the animals needed to pull them. They were increasingly fighting on empty stomachs and sheer raw courage, simply because their supply system couldn't meet the demands of a modern industrial war. Section 4. Morale and Desertion, Psychology of the Ranks. Zooming back into the mind of the common soldier, there were profound psychological battles being waged against boredom and deep, crushing homesickness. And this brings us to one of the most fascinating details of the war. There was this song called Lorena. It was a deeply sentimental, weepily nostalgic song about lost love. Well, it became so incredibly popular in the camps and evoked such intense homesickness among men hearing rumors that their families were starving back home that it actually triggered desertions in epidemic proportions. The psychological impact was so severe that Robert E. Lee actually tried to ban the song from being played in Confederate camps. Crazy, right? So just how rampant did desertion get? To put a number on it, after the devastating defeat at Fredericksburg, the Union Army was losing 100 men every single day to desertion. 100 men a day! The psychological toll of total war was simply breaking these guys faster than they could even be replaced. To combat this absolute collapse in morale, desperate commanders resorted to unbelievably brutal punishments to maintain order among the collapsing ranks. If you were caught deserting, the consequences were severe. Punishments ranged from being physically branded on the forehead with a hot iron to being stood before a firing squad made up of your own comrades. It was a harsh, completely unforgiving reality, meant to terrify soldiers into staying on the line. Section 5. A divided home front, social fractures. Now, the immense pressure of the war wasn't just tearing the country in half. It was tearing the respective home fronts apart from the inside out. Both sides faced severe domestic upheaval driven by conscription and really intense class resentment. Down in the South, the implementation of the 20 Negro Law essentially exempted wealthy plantation owners from the draft, which, as you can imagine, totally inflamed the working class. Up in the North, the Enrollment Act sparked the catastrophic New York draft riots, where anti-conscription protests completely devolved into mass chaos. These policies were creating deep societal cracks in both the Union and the Confederacy at the exact same time. And this bitter sentiment, the idea that it was a rich man's war and a poor man's fight, swept right across both borders. It fueled horrific domestic violence. During those northern draft riots in New York, class resentment and racial hostility absolutely boiled over, leading to the incredibly tragic and brutal lynching of Black Americans right in the streets. The home front was literally cracking under the unbearable weight of total war. Section 6. A New Meaning. The Gettysburg Address. As we finally reach the close of 1863, the sheer scale of the carnage demanded some sort of justification. And it's incredible to consider, really, that amidst years of complex failures, mud, disease, and deep societal fracture, it took President Abraham Lincoln a mere 2 minutes, just a 2-minute address at Gettysburg, to completely redefine the immense suffering of the entire war. In that tiny, brief speech, Lincoln completely elevated the conflict. He transformed it from a mere territorial struggle or a debate over states' rights into the ultimate test of whether a democracy could actually endure at its absolute breaking point. He promised that the staggering human cost would ultimately result in a new birth of freedom for the nation. And that brings us to the core of why this history matters to us today. The physical mud and that terrifying primitive medicine of 1863, sure, that's behind us. But the social fractures, the class divides, the extreme political polarization, the heavy burdens of civic duty, those are timeless. So I'll leave you with this to consider. When a nation is deeply fractured by class, intense politics, and crisis, what does it truly take for modern democracies to endure those extreme fractures and forge their own new birth of freedom? Thanks so much.